Welcome to True Crime Cases. Today, we are unveiling a shocking story. A girl visited a store a short while ago, only a few minutes from her home, yet she never returned. Thus, the police began their investigation, and during the research, they found several quite odd hints, but the riddle hasn't been solved. Decades without a solution until the truth appeared in a totally unexpected tale is the day when Amelia was born. In Ellen, Illinois, on the 10th of 1978, she lived with her mother and two older. Their village consisted of brothers and a sister, regarded as one of the most secure in the region, and Amelia enjoyed being outside. She had wandered the streets for hours with other local children. Amelia was well liked and had a lot of pals. She actively participated in school life and even won the vice presidential election. Moreover, she was the class president. She participated in softball and volleyball. 16-year-old in the summer of 1981, Amelia was attending lessons during the summer at school and devoted the most of her leisure time to spending July 21st with friends. Amelia arrived home from school at around 1:30 p.m. Immediately upon arriving home, she chose to stroll to a nearby shop to get a chocolate bar and a Coke for herself and her mother, who anticipated her return only a short while after. The store was nearby, but over time, it became evident that something was amiss. Since Amelia was not returning home, her mother initially believed she could have fled into a group of pals and left with them. There were no cell phones back then, thus, she was unable to contact Amelia and had to wait as the evening drew closer. As her anxiety increased, she contacted none of Amelia's friends. However, seeing her becoming desperate that day, she went to the store and scanned the roads throughout the route, although there wasn't indication of Christ anywhere. The following few hours were spent with family, trying to find her, but when there, by 1:40 a.m., she was still nowhere to be seen. Mom made the decision to call the police. Officers started the search right away, beginning by assembling Amelia's final motions before they talked with the store's cashier she'd visited. The man was familiar with Amelia, resided close by, and even had babies watch her. He attested to the fact that when she was younger, Amelia had arrived at around 3 p.m., grabbed a few chocolate bars, and departed. She made no mention of her destination. However, the clerk observed that she appeared to content and unconcerned with her actions. Hit him as cops discovered anything strange as well. A couple other witnesses who saw at the store Amelia, but none of them might remember her next destination. Investigators interviewed every one of Amelia's friends, thinking about the potential that she may have become distracted while spending time with some of them, but not all of them. On that day, one of her pals had spotted her. Police then concentrated all of their efforts, continued the search, and started looking via the streets, although at that point it was the middle of the night already, making the search much more difficult. They were adamant that there was no Christie's trace, no leads, no clues, nothing. So the hunt went on through early in the morning, and by noon, a fresh batch. One of the cops got control of it. Recommended attempting to follow Amelia's most likely path. He assumed she had most likely used the quickest route from a shortcut from her home to the store. Back then, via an adjacent field, was a big, empty lot with long grass between the neighborhood and it would take quite a while to stroll around the store. It takes some time for adults to drive vehicles. Wasn't a problem, but nearby children who visited the shop or the adjacent every time McDonald's took a shortcut across the field were a little embedded in the grass. The detective chose to pursue this trail. While he was moving along it, he noticed something odd in the grass. He pushed through the bushes, discovered that it was a human body, and he He knew Amelia right away, phoned for backup right away, and the body was given to the medical examiners for additional forensic analysis. A professional investigated the crime site for any proof other than their investigation, showed no footprints and no personal information. Possessions. Nothing to clarify. What if the medical examiners had found that Amelia had passed away at the age of 8? Additionally, they discovered indications of stab wounds, went and gathered the offender's biological substance, but in 1985, DNA testing remained in its infancy state and did not frequently employed in criminal investigations. Thus, the sample cannot be analyzed. Was kept for use in the future. Amelia's mom also assisted the cops in piecing together. Amelia had another intriguing detail. Been sporting a ring made of pearls. But the ring wasn't there that day. Not present on her body or at the detectives visiting crime scenes came to the conclusion that perhaps the murderer took it and directed all police to maintain vigilance on pawn stores just in case the killer attempted to sell it without any tangible proof. That collaboration with law enforcement aimed at identifying possible witnesses who may have observed the murderer by the field or Amelia. They were able to locate some individuals who have previously taken the same route, the murder's approximate time, but none of them said they saw anything suspicious. It was really strange since the body of Amelia was only a few yards away. The route, although being obscured by the tall grass, makes it practically impossible to identify. Detectives also discovered that only a couple of dozen yards away from when the body of Amelia was discovered, a family had been throwing a cookout in their backyard. Yet even though it's so near to, none of them recalled the scene, observing or hearing anything from outside an average gas station employee. It also worked around 60 yards from the field. His whole shift on that particular day, but didn't take note of anything unusual to. The cops thought the scenario was strange. Numerous persons had been in the vicinity of the crime scene, but nobody heard or saw anything. Researchers hypothesized that the unidentified, the assailant, either pursued Amelia from the shop to the field or came upon her along the route. He probably took her just a few yards into the dense grass. All of her without a sound. Investigators thought about the potential that Amelia may have been acquainted with her murderer, which would clarify why there weren't screaming, considering how tiny their town was. And many locals were acquainted. Police started looking into each man. Christie was unknown, but this endeavor lied. Additionally, they did not prepare a list of guys in the region who have previously been convicted of violent offenses. A number of suspects were examined, but none of them were able to be linked to the killing. For a number of months, the police didn't make much headway in solving the mystery. They kept investigating on leads and looking at fresh suspects. However, each lead led them to a dead end. Stop this, which has been going on for 3 long years, until a surprising discovery was made in 1988. DNA analysis was already become a crucial instrument in criminal. Detectives conducting investigations made the decision to get DNA samples from each individual who has been considered a possible suspect in Amelia's case throughout the years. Decided to work together, and none of the biological evidence was supported by the samples discovered at the location, but one, the individual who declined to donate their DNA. An example of a 34-year-old man is Dana Henry, residing close to the field where Christ was discovered, had been in the police's sights. From the investigation's inception, Henry denied possessing anything at the time to do with the offense, but his current refusal to provide an example of a detective sincerely doubt his innocence. Police chose to ask the court for permission to acquire his DNA. Henry showed up to the court session and persisted in his assertion that he was not guilty. Yet he was accused of, detained in a local court for contempt of court, prison cell for a few days just after Henry consented to give his DNA sample. His DNA ultimately did not match Henry, and the killer's sample were freed, after which he informed journalists that he was detained in a prison cell that was naked and only freed upon his surrender to the overwhelming pressure, and grudgingly consented to give an example of what Henry claimed to have spent, around $60,000 for legal expenses each, substantial sum of money at the moment. His house had to be mortgaged, and he ultimately lost a lot of his friends, and his family abandoned him. Henry, outraged and dissatisfied, filed a action taken against the police force. However, it didn't appear to go anywhere at all. Although his identity was cleared by DNA evidence, several people continued to think he was guilty. Years later, Henry told reporters, said the entire experience had destroyed his life, while never having been officially accused of committing a CRI for another. Amelia's case was still a stagnation until 1989, when a sudden twist put it back in the public eye. A restraining order was issued by a court in opposition to a local man who was sending a barrage of tips to the victim's relatives about the person he thought was in charge. For the murder of Amelia, the guy known as Willis initially got in touch with Christie's family members in late 1985. He asserted, possessed knowledge on the killers, identify, and began forwarding them. Every tip was examined using a variety of leads by law enforcement, but each time it proved to be either unrealistic or totally unrelated to the situation at hand. This continued for over 4 years until it was too much for Amelia's family to handle. No longer, they lodged a grievance, and a court ruled that Willis could not from getting in touch with them ever again. Observing the police restraining order, made the decision to look into Willis directly. Yet they couldn't find any proof that connected him. The killer's DNA was linked to the 2000 crime. Was entered into the FBI database, however. Matches were discovered. The case was still open, occasionally chilly, for several years. The cops went back to look into it after advice, but they never came close to apprehending the murder. This continued for over the course of 3 full decades. All of the first investigators had either retired or went on, and the case of Amelia had been put on a different team in 2015. Something very unexpected occurred. They received a message one day from the DNA sample was taken from the FBI database. Amelia's murderer was a great fit for the DNA profile was recently uploaded. Belongs to an individual called Michael Jones, was a small-town resident named Champaign, some 150 kilometers away from. Jones's DNA was put to Amelia's house database upon his arrest for his wife had alleged domestic abuse him to the authorities, which resulted in his arrest in accordance with Illinois legislation passed in 2002. Anybody who has any suspicions about a DNA sample must be provided by the crime. Interestingly, the primary proponent of this law was the attorney for the state from the same county where the murder of Amelia occurred. Location, as well as this specific unresolved case, had played a significant role in his drive to pass this law as quickly as possible. The investigators discovered the DNA match, acted quickly to investigate Michael. The first thing that caught my attention, Jones, was that no one had ever mentioned his name. He wasn't a suspect in the previous case, but observer, or even a distant, related to the inquiry. That the detective had only been unaware of his existence. Michael Jones' criminal history was lengthy. His first encounter with the law and history occurred in the middle of the 70s when he attacked a female, but for some reason he seems to have escaped any serious repercussions. Within a year, Jones assaulted her. After assaulting her, the 27-year-old woman fled her in the parking lot of a hospital. When Police issued an arrest warrant for him. Michael surrendered himself during his trial. He conveyed profound remorse for his behaviors and asserted that he had a fantastic adherence to the law, which is why he, Jones, also freely turned himself in, claimed that he had severe mental health conditions and required expert assistance, but an independent, a psychiatrist concluded that he was completely conscious of what he was doing. As a result, Jones received a 10 to 20 year sentence in, as you can expect, incarceration was. Given his outstanding behavior, he was discharged early, only completed 6 years of his punishment, and returned to the streets by 1983, 2 years prior to the murder of Amelia. Even more remarkable is the fact that the victim was not made aware of his early release thereafter. She said that if she had knew that she would have put her all into her ability to contest the ruling. A year following his release, Michael received married, but his first wife left him in 1994 and obtained a restraining order against him. The cause of his displaying an excessive fascination with one of her young family members. Yet even so, concerning conduct, no official charges were ever filed. Michael was taken into custody in 1999. Once more, this time for attacking a family. Detectives, who are part of his new girlfriend, discovered that Michael frequently went on extended motorbike rides alone and regularly traveled to Chicago to see family. Considering that the town of Christ was on the margins of his path, he went by the region while visiting his relatives, if that was the situation, which would clarify why he never came to the detective's attention. If Michael was only stopping by for a few hours of monitoring his presence would Amelia's. It's almost difficult. According to his mother, she had never heard his name. Prior to the cops initially calling her to inquire about Michael, she didn't give it much thought. For the previous 3 decades, investigators have reached out to her several times, periods with inquiries, so this simply felt like any other ordinary question. But when cops were able to, Michael provided a new DNA sample while he was incarcerated and verified once and for all that he was the murderer they went to see in person. Amelia's mother will deliver the man's news after all these years. Accountable for the death of her daughter, had been apprehended at last before to a formal, accusing Michael of killing Amelia. The detective talked to his former lover and discovered further information about him that she characterized Michael as having despite his erratic disposition, he could be serene 1 second and then abruptly plunge into a fury for no apparent cause. She furthermore stated that he has an obsession with TV crime series and detective novels. This data prompted scientists to believe that Michael may not simply be accountable for the murder of Amelia, but perhaps further unresolved offenses as well. His habit of traveling alone is illegal. Propensities and interest in criminal activity. There were rumors that suggested he may have known ways to hide his tracks and stay away from leaving traces after construction. Their legal action against Michael police. He was formally charged on September 18, 2015, and Michael denied any participation. In the end, the case of Amelia's murder went to court, but the proceedings took a long time. The trial didn't happen for 3 long years. Beginning in 2018, prosecutors looked for life in prison, but ultimately Michael agreed to enter a guilty plea in return for a reduced term as part of the agreement. He didn't have to divulge any information regarding the offense, but using the DNA proof, there was no doubt regarding his guilt. Thus, the judge imposed a punishment, sentenced him to 80 years in jail with a potential for parole at no sooner than, in other words, in 2095, Michael will probably, Amelia's family, never again walk free. Expressed gratitude to the investigators for ultimately closing out the case. Amelia's mom also said she was frustrated Due to Michael's early 1983 release, she noted that if he had fulfilled he wouldn't receive the entire 10-year sentence. Had the opportunity to harm her daughter, Christy would be living today, too. The individual who was first suspected of criminality was present at the trial as well. Actual murderer. In a subsequent interview, he said that the charges had destroyed his life, and even after several decades, he still hadn't healed completely. He hoped it would benefit him to see justice done. Henry also disclosed that it didn't heal, that in all these years, nobody leave the police force at any time. I apologized.